So for over 26 years, V1 has been a leader in video analysis and ground force pressure technology. From casual and competitive golfers to golf professionals and instructors, we've focused our products around one thing, and that's improvement. With that in mind, we have looked at 3 areas to help any golfer improve. First is video capture and ground pressure technology using our V1 Pro software and a V1 pressure mat. Next, we focus on lesson delivery, whether an in-person lesson, a lesson summary or recap, or a remote lesson to a student far away utilizing our V1 Pro software and our V1 consumer apps to help communicate. Third is our on-course shot tracking and GPS app of V1 Game. Its data integrated with the V1 Coach app allows coaches to better understand how their students are performing on the course. These 3 areas allow you to help your students create a better swing and a lower score, whether in person or remote. Tonight's an exciting night for us because we talk all the time directly with golf professionals and how they use our technology to help their students improve. But tonight we're going to be speaking with a different group. This is a group from Honsberger Physio that uses our technology to help their golfers move better, to be able to make better swings. So we've got an interesting topic of using pressure data to balance the body. The Honsberger Physio team utilizes our V1 pressure mat to better understand their student's body and allow them to make proper motions to better their golf swing. I want to welcome Rob and Honsberger along with Kevin and Dan, and we're really excited to have you here.
Thanks so much, Chip. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for joining us this evening. My name's Robin Honsberger, and I'm the head of business development and operations at Honsberger Physio Plus. Is there a little bit of feedback? Are you guys hearing that on your end?
Not at all.
Are we okay? Sorry about
Yep.
that, guys. Just want to make sure that it's not echoing on your screens there. We're coming to, sorry?
I said you sound great.
Okay, thanks. We'll keep rolling. This is what happens when you go live. We're coming to you live from Markham, Ontario, Canada. It's so great to be with you here this evening. I've got 2 subject matter experts here with me tonight, Kevin Honsberger and Daniel Hilborn, who you'll be introduced to momentarily. But first, a quick little intro on who we are and why we're different. Honsberger Physio Plus was started 35 years ago by identifying a gap in the professional treatment of injury. With a background in education, healthcare, athletic coaching, and training, they journeyed to open a new style of treatment clinic specializing in injury management and empowerment. With biomechanics as the guiding philosophy, we have evolved into a sports medicine practice with an innovative approach to injury prevention and recovery for elite athletes. We have taken what works for a pro and the elite level athletes and applied that to the general population. We have a team of physiotherapists, registered massage therapists, athletic therapists, osteopaths, strength and conditioning coaches, personal trainers, and kinesiologists that support over 14 sites across the Greater Toronto area. We work with a wide variety of sports and varying level of athletic abilities, including hockey, football, rugby, CrossFit, volleyball, racket sports, baseball players, dancers, you name it. But most relevant to this evening is our passion for golf. I will leave that to Kevin to dive into shortly, but what's most unique about Honsberger Physio Plus and the reason you are all here this evening is to learn about how we've incorporated technology into our practice to validate our assessments and prove that our treatments are working in real time. Using technology to collect data that we may not be able to pick up with the naked eye, we use that to guide our treatment plan and to help create more coachable players. With tools like D2, FitLight, NeuroTracker X, K-Vest, Blast, Strike Baseball, but most importantly, the V1 pressure mat. We've had the opportunity to work alongside some of the best coaches in the industry, including Brian Mogg, Danny King, Brandon McLeod of the Aim Golf Academy, Jim Curry, Andrew Donaldson, Nick Kenny, to name a few. At some of the top private and public courses in Ontario, including Openburg Golf Club, Magna Golf Club, the National Golf Club of Canada, Royal Ashburn, Rosedale, Mississauga Golf and Country Club. And that's just where we're getting started. Our thought process is, why guess when you can test? And you will see that embedded in our treatment process this evening. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Kevin Honsberger, the president of Honsberger Physio Plus, to share a few words about how we got started in the world of golf and how that's led us to where we are today.
Thanks, Robin, and welcome, guys. It's exciting to be able to share with you guys tonight some of our stories and our journey. I've been a physio for 40 years, and I'll be quite honest, I didn't know too much about golf when I started. My passion and my special interest was in low back pain. But when I started getting golfers coming in with low back pain and I had to fix them, I was really at a loss for what to do. And I would always ask them, I said, well, have you went for a lesson? I said, yeah, I went for a lesson, but the golf pro made it worse. I said, well, did you change golf pros? I said, yes. Every time I went for another golf lesson, I would come back with back pain and I'm going to give up golf. I said, don't give up golf. So the journey started with, then I said, well, I don't think a golf pro would actually understand what a herniated disc would do in the golf swing. We're trained that way. And sometimes us physios don't even know that. So what I started out early in 2000 was, I'm going to approach a local golf pro and said, would you mind if I did the treatment right on the range, walk the client over to you and explain to them what I just did so you wouldn't hurt their back? And we knocked it out of the park. From then on, we sort of created relationships with all our local pros and working actually right on their facilities. But this was a journey, and the journey wasn't alone. I have to give credit to Mike Bentley in the early days of K-Vest and Ramsey McMaster, bless his soul. He would always call me up, but I could never understand what he was saying half the time. But I had to reach out to golf pros and golf professionals all over the world to say, well, what if I did this? Would that happen? And what if I did that? That would happen. So now we have pros would come to Toronto and we would take them to a hitting facility. And if I asked you what would be the 5 or 7 common golf stretches, they wouldn't be the same for every golfer. So what we had to do is we were in a facility with Foresight. We actually took a 7-iron and said, okay, we're going to do a stretch. We're going to change the attack angle, spin rate. So we actually validated with the technology what that pro had to do before every match he played and after the match. It wasn't guesswork. It wasn't going on the internet, or everybody's got their favorite stretch. And I just didn't believe that that was unique enough or specialized enough to that particular player. So again, even in my field, I had to use tech to confirm to me and the player what to actually do. So that's the journey. And we're going to introduce Dan now to sort of carry it on.
Awesome. Thanks, Kevin. So I'm an athletic therapist and osteopath. I've been working with golfers for about 15 years. I'm here at Honsberger for the last 2 or so. And we really started using V1, as Kevin and Robin both said, as a way to validate or create objective findings to validate what we're doing to make real change with our golfers. We started to work with a lot of golfers. I've been working with golfers for a while now, and we have seen a lot of common injuries, a lot of really common kind of biomechanical breakdowns. And this leads to a lot of really common swing faults. And we have to start thinking, is there a way to correlate these? Is there a way to correlate to see what's happening with the body with a certain miss in the swing? And we're going to go through a few examples a little bit later to look at that. We then started working with a lot of golf coaches. And we see with these coaches, they may have players that are struggling to create a change in their swing fault or to change a trace that we see in that swing. So we started asking, could a physical restriction be causing problems in the swing? And whenever we look at a golfer, we kind of look at it from 2 perspectives. Do they have a physical restriction that's limiting them? Or is it a motor control problem? A motor control problem meaning the golfer has the range of motion, the strength, the flexibility, everything they need to kind of make an efficient swing. Physical restriction being some sort of a body limitation, a lack of thoracic rotation or hip turn, whatever that may be. The issue becomes is we can't coach somebody out of a physical restriction. We could have them do golf lessons or whatever, like hit balls until they're blue in the face. But if they always have something that's going to limit their ability to turn or a limitation in their ability to use their foot, we're never going to see real changes in their trace until we can take that physical restriction out. Which is when we really started working with V1 to be able to, again, validate a lot of these changes. The real and most important thing that I think kind of differentiates our assessment process is looking head to toe. Too many times we've seen people kind of come in from another clinic or doing treatment somewhere and my left hip hurts, and they only treat the left hip. And the question we always ask is kind of why? Why is there more stress going into your left hip and not your right? Why is it not your left knee or your left ankle? So we need to kind of look at the body head to toe to say, where is this restriction coming from? not just correct it in general. And we look at it, each joint in this terms of mobility or stability. And we started from the bottom up. Every joint from the ankle all the way up to our head kind of has an alternating function. The ankle or the foot's supposed to be very stable, ankle mobile, knee very stable, hip mobile, stable, mobile. We see this with a lot of golfers, people who sit all day, get really restricted through their thoracic spine, really restricted through their hip mobility. These people are doing core strengthening until they're, again, all day, 3-4 times a day. The core never gets stronger because the joints surrounding it aren't able to move. So it's kind of, we can't just look at the area of the problem. We need to look all around it to make sure that we're fixing the problem, not just kind of treating some of the symptoms associated with it. And this is something we see with a lot of young golfers or athletic golfers is they may be able to put a good move or hit, make good contact, and we see a lot of success with their game, but are they creating mobility from the right places? And we see players not creating mobility from the right places. This is something that one might eventually lead to swing faults and really could lead to injury down the road. And if we can remove these physical restrictions from golfers, we help to eliminate pain in the first place. And that's one of the things that, and also can we give coaches now a workable body that they can really make changes with. And this is something that we've really started to see with a lot of our players is they're missing less time to injury because we're able to catch a lot of these things before they become a problem. So we'll have a lot of golfers come in and we'll look at their trace every time, get them on the V1 mat, hit a couple of balls and look at that trace. Has something changed? And if something changes, is that a predictor of injury down the road? And if we can catch these things, screen, have them come in, screen their swing, assess their body, fix it, have them swing again, and we see this dysfunction change, have we prevented time lost to injury? We see lots of golfers now, Will Zalatoris just had to pull out of the FedEx Cup from injury. Is this something that could have been caught if we were screening golfers and noticing little changes in their swing before it's gone too far and they're already missing time? And it's something we've seen with a lot of the golfers that we've worked with is they're missing less time and they're also playing better golf. At the end of the day, the biggest thing that we try to work with any golfer is education. We need golfers to understand when they have a bad shot, what does that mean in terms of alignment? And often a bad shot can be correlated and around to some sort of a misalignment. So we'll see this a lot of time. A golfer will be out there the first 5, 6, 7, 8 holes, they're playing great golf. Hole 9, they block a drive to the right. 2, 3 out of their next 5 shots, we see that same miss over and over again. Did the person just kind of forget how to play golf on the 8th hole, or do they have some sort of physical restriction that's now not allowing them to go through their regular motion? Again, we need our golfers to understand when they see a miss, what could that mean in terms of their body? And is there a way they can correct that right on the course? So if they're trying to battle their body through the last 7, 8, 9, 10 holes of golf, again, it's going to lead to not great scores, problems in their swing, and eventually probably it's going to lead to injury. So education and making our players understand where the problem is really the most important thing that we need them to understand as we work with them. So Shep, I'll get you to bring up the first video there with the players we're going to look at. This is going to be a fairly quick one. Awesome. So if we can see first player we work with here, and this is something we're just going to quickly talk about setup. And obviously there's a lot of things we can pick on with setup, ball position, spine angle, but specifically when we're talking about pressure and trace, if you can see on the trace there, this golfer actually has 60% of his weight on the left side in setup. And one thing I'll always ask golfers when we see this is, are you trying to set up preloaded to one side, which may be something that you're working on with your golf coach to help with weight transfer or rotation or whatever that might be. And that's not necessarily wrong. It's if you're trying to stand 50-50, but you're really preloaded onto one side. And this is something that we've seen with a lot of golfers. And I know the golfer on the screen there is a lefty. You can see he set up 60-40 into his left. With right-handed golfers, a left leg being a hair functionally or structurally a little bit longer is something that we're seeing all the time. And this is something as golf pros, you're going to see players going to really struggle to get their weight onto their front side, to create steeper attack angles, to cover the ball and post up on the front side. If you think of a right-handed golfer who has a longer left leg, it's kind of like they're swinging up a hill. Really difficult to transfer the weight to our front side, swinging up a hill. Difficult to cover the ball, get our weight forward. We may see a lot of these players hanging back because it's just difficult to get that weight forward. So this is something, again, I stress to a lot of golf pros that if you see somebody standing on their mat and it's 60-40, I mean, first ask, are you trying to set up 50-50 or is this like some sort of a discrepancy? And if it is, it's something that you need to get assessed. This is something you're never going to be able to coach somebody out of, having a structural or functional leg length discrepancy. Functional leg length meaning you have a pelvis that's a slight rotation that creates a difference. Structural meaning the bones may physically be longer on one side than the other, which is actually more common than a lot of people would think. So if we bring up the after view here.
Hey, Dan, we just had a good question. Somebody asked, is it specific to, is this person somebody who plays hockey? Is there something specific that might cause that, or is this something that commonly that you see?
No, this is across the board. I mean, we see it, I work a lot with golfers. Yeah, it's a rotational sports thing more often than not. So yeah, hockey, golf, tennis, baseball, yeah, leg length discrepancy is something that's incredibly common, and that's going to affect performance regardless of the sport. Hope that answers your question. So if we look at the before and after here, this is a golfer that, again, we haven't told them to change anything in their setup. But if we look at before, we look at after, we went through maybe 5-10 minutes of treatment, got them back onto the pressure mat, and you can see he's almost standing 50-50 now. Again, something you can't coach somebody out of. We didn't tell him anything, but now his setup's in a position that's going to give him the ability to transfer weight side to side or get onto his front side, something that he probably would have had a very difficult time of doing before. So that's kind of the quick one I wanted to go through is in terms of setup, that's something that you got to kind of screen out or send out to somebody because we need to have somebody take a look at that. Awesome. So we'll move on to the next one. We'll delve a little bit into more stuff that you as golf pros can do to start correcting some of these issues that we're seeing. Awesome. Perfect. So second golfer, so we don't have to, I can just keep it on still for a second. Perfect. So second golfer we have here is kind of that classic D pattern that we see with a lot of golfers. That's getting their weight up into their toes, coming through impact. A lot of times as a golfer, we're going to see block right with the longer clubs, pull left, more of the hook with the shorter clubs, but a really common pattern that we see. And again, we've seen a lot of players come through this, and I've been working with a golf coach, and they say, I need to stay down on the ball more. I need to strengthen my core. But is it just as easy as strengthening your core? We'll have people that will come in and they'll be saying, I've been doing strength exercises for the last 6 months, and I haven't been able to change my pattern. So we start asking, hey, is there something structural that's happening that's not allowing you to create a strong core? And that's where we need to start looking. So if I see a golfer come in, this D pattern is a pattern that I'm seeing, again, fairly consistently. If it's something I see with a golfer, 2 areas we're going to look at right away, that thoracic spine, that thoracic kind of hunch forward kyphosis. And if you look at the golfer on the screen there, you can kind of see his upper back really gets into this kind of hunch forward position. We'll talk about that in a second. And the second one is their ability to dissociate their pelvis, or can they create pelvis dissociation without their spine moving? For somebody who doesn't have or has too much thoracic kyphosis or this kind of hunched forward position, it causes this lordotic position, this sway back. When we get into this sway back position, it actually lengthens a lot of your core muscles. When muscles in a lengthened position, there's just no way you can create enough strength to create stability in the area while you're turning at 60, 70, 80 miles an hour in a golf swing. So we need to be able to create that enough thoracic extension to create that. Same idea, if a player can't dissociate pelvic movement or open their pelvis as they come through impact, they don't have room for their hands, and their only option is to stand up and through the ball. So a couple structural things that we look at that we need to work on to give the player the change that he needs to really fix this trace. So I'm going to use Robin here for a second. 2 things that we use for a lot of players. This is called the posture arch. I'm not sure how many people can see that on the small screen there. I think we're going to throw something up at the end so people can have a closer look at it.
Chip, is there any way to put us on the big screen so people can see how we're going to be using the arch? Sorry for the quick.
Yeah, we'll come back to that in just a second. Posture arch. So we use this as both a way to test to see if players have enough thoracic extension, as well as a way for treatment down the road. So as an assessment tool, we'll bring you this way. So kind of on the table there, we have the player, athlete, golfer kind of line up. We want the peak of the arch in that mid part of their back, kind of like between the shoulder blades, and we get them to lie down. 10, the person create enough extension in their thoracic spine to get their head flat on the table. You can see if I let Robin's head there go, it's going to kind of snap back into extension, which is a fail in this test. So getting somebody to lie in the sport is an easy way we can have golf pros screen players to see, hey, do you have enough thoracic extension? No, this might be one of the reasons that you're not getting better. So we're going to test them on there. Second thing that we use with a lot of people is I'll have it come up. It's called the pelvic clock. Again, another really common tool that we use to teach dissociation of the pelvis. Again, can the pelvis turn without the spine? You can see kind of there's a little clock in the center there and an area for your tailbone to sit on. Find Robin down on her back. And lifting up, it's going to be a little difficult to see. We're going to rest that right on her tailbone, starting with the legs flat. Can she create pelvic rotation? Getting it going to 3 o'clock, get it coming to 9 o'clock. And you need the edge of that clock to be able to rest on the side of the table. And a lot of players are really going to struggle with this initial movement right off the bat. A player's really good here. I'm then going to bring them into this position. And can they go side to side and leave their knees in place? And this is something Robin does not, a little bit better to the right, but as a right-handed golfer, unable to get to her left side. That immediately screams difficulty getting to her impact position and probably has a D pattern if we screened her on the mat. So we're going to see she has no other option. If she can't clear her pelvis, it's got to come up and through because that's really the only option. From there, if we see these patterns, we need to correct them. So with any player we work with, there's going to be some hands-on manual component. We need to kind of look to see where that dysfunction is to be able to create it. Once we fix that dysfunction, we need to teach our golfers a way to reinforce it. So these tools, both the arch and the pelvic clock, become a great tool that all of our players can use on a daily basis to reinforce the patterns. Anytime we see a therapist, those changes are really lasting 12, maybe 24 hours. So if we're not doing something in between to reinforce the patterns, we're really not going to get anywhere. We're going to basically maintain where we're at versus seeing improvement. If we're not seeing improvement, we're really not going to see any change in the trace long term. So if I get Robin, so I'm going to have her work on this. Again, she could do it fairly well with the legs flat. So I'm going to have her kind of stay in this position and give her a little bit of help here and try to turn to the left. And again, something she struggles. Probably needs some manual treatment first. We're not going to do that on video. Like watching paint dry. So yeah, maybe 10, 12 repetitions, but something she's got to get on a couple of times throughout the day to be able to teach the pelvis how to dissociate. Because again, if she isn't able to fix that physical restriction, we're never really going to see a change in the swing. Number one. Two, if we come back to that posture arch, slide that out, bring it up. Something that I recommend to almost every rotational athlete I work with, especially golfers, is again, if you're stuck in that kyphotic or hunched over position, we just don't have much ability to create rotation in our spine. If we're unable to create rotation in our spine, again, we're never going to be able to clear through, and we're also never going to be able to get out of that lordotic or sway back position and create the core strength that we want, no matter how much core strengthening we do. So again, with that arch kind of in the center of the back, have her start maybe 5-6 minutes, kind of 20 minutes being that end goal of where we need to see her to get to. But creating thoracic extension and then pelvic hip dissociation is a physical restriction that's almost always going to cause that D pattern that we see. Thanks, Rod.
Dan, it's really interesting. After spending 19 years as a golf pro and trying to fix everybody by making them make a move in their golf swing, hearing the things that you're saying now as I'm sitting here in my chair like this, hunched over, it makes it very, interesting to understand, like the arch of the back. And, we talk about somebody losing their spine or early extension, causing them to stand up because they're getting their weight on their toes. We're telling them they need to stay further back. Well, you're actually looking at it as a way to, how am I going to make that body actually do that on its own by changing the physical makeup of the body and the movement of the body, which is very cool to hear.
And that's why we started kind of partnering with golf professionals, is realize that we kind of need each other. Meaning, like, we don't teach golf. Like, I'm not going to give people a golf lesson, but we understand the swing enough to say, what are you lacking and what do you need? And then we work with a lot of golf pros to say, hey, this is something that this player may struggle with in their swing now. And these are some modifications that you may need to make for the time being until we can improve. We can't ask players to do something that they're not capable of. And I think that's something that, again, as a golf pro, it's just not in your background. So if we're not sort of working directly with the pro, and you, one, maybe causing them to hurt themselves, but two, like if they're trying to create, like get as much rotation as Rory or Dustin Johnson in their backswing, they're just never going to be able to do that. So we have to kind of say, this is what you're capable of now. This is where we need to stop the backswing. And as we progress with improving range of motion, how can that swing then change based on what we see? So if
We've got a couple of things real quick. For those that are listening, we do have in the chat, you can see a link to more information on the two, I guess you can't call them swing aids in this instance, but the two stretching mechanisms they've been using. We also have a
they're the two
question.
most common ones we recommend, really. Like their pelvic dissociation and thoracic extension are necessary for a golf swing. So yeah, they're basically across the board. Everybody we see uses those.
And then we do have a question. Could you use a Bosu ball instead of that posture arch? Is there a way you could use that?
Yeah, I find it's not usually as good. If you want, it's usually a little bit too soft. Two, it's just more difficult to position in the upper back. They're usually kind of big too, so you end up getting. And a lot of the things you see is, I see a lot of those products advertised, and a lot of times they have them set up in the person's low back, but a person's already set up in that too much, like putting it down in this area is really kind of counterproductive. It's upper back where people have the lack of restriction, and it's where we need to do it. So yes, I mean, is it going to work as well? Probably not, but in theory, yes. You really need something in there to force it. Because a lot of times people say, hey, can I just do back extension exercises? And if I just start extending, all of my extension just naturally comes from here, and that thoracic spine stays very rigid. So you need something kind of in there to be able to force in extension. You need something a little bit more rigid than a ball more often than not.
The nice thing with this one too is it has the acupressure knob, so it's able to go a little bit deeper in certain targeted areas as well. So it's designed specifically for this use, as opposed to using a Bosu ball or a foam roller or a rolled towel. You might get there a little bit. You're certainly not going to be as effective without a tool like this.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
So if there's no more questions, we can bring up those two swings again. There we can kind of walk maybe the first one through and bring the kind of before and after up together. But we can see this guy again. If we look right at that thoracic spine, really hunch forward through his upper back, then we see that kind of big loop that as he gets nice into his back, but a little bit late in the weight transfer. But then as we see him come forward, if we watch that red line, you kind of see that I drew right on his hips there. As he comes through the ball, you can see him really thrusting forward because he's not able to get enough hip rotation. That thoracic spine really kyphotic or hunched forward. So he has no option but to get the weight into his toes. And if we look at that pressure there, we can see the weight going heavily into his toes on both sides. And this player is, he's more of a block player with his longer clubs and low hook with the shorter clubs, which is that kind of common fault we see with that D pattern. So if we can bring the two up together, those are the two. I think that's the same swing.
Yeah, I'm pulling the next one up.
Yeah. Perfect. So without even looking at the player swing, immediately if we look at that thoracic kyphosis, this is after maybe 10, 15 minutes of treatment. I had him lie on the arch for a few minutes, and before we even got him to swing, just in that setup position there, if you look at kind of that upper back, immediately that hunch is already significantly less. Like it still needs some work to be corrected, and this is where we need to be using these tools on a consistent basis to be able to reinforce this pattern, but immediately less. If we then again look at that trace in the D pattern, you can see it's a much more linear, straight back, straight through. We're not getting that big loop as he's coming from backswing or from the transition point into his downswing. So if we kind of roll them through there into the backswing, maybe we can roll them both kind of up to the top, or one at a time if you want. You can see in that swing on the left there, the first one, he's already starting to come off of that line a little bit, where in the one on the right, he's getting way better hip rotation and starting to load into his heels as he gets into the backswing. And then the really interesting one that I love to see as he comes down through impact, and if we watch kind of that distance between that line on his glutes, in that line in between there and his glutes, you're going to see him really stay down and on the ball and way, way, way less early extension on that swing on the right. Again, this is a player that now has the mobility he needs to create an efficient swing. And here's where we pass him off to a golf pro to be able to rehearse his pattern. Now that he knows his restriction, he knows how to reinforce the changes that we've made. Now we need some motor control work. He needs to understand, now that I have the ability to stay down on the ball, how do I do that consistently in a golf swing? So this is where this kind of relationship works together. And we need each other to kind of create benefits to the golfers in terms of limiting dispersion patterns, swing faults, as well as limiting players from pain and injury down the road. Hope that all makes sense, everybody. Good, doing well for time. There's no questions.
I've got a question. What's a drill you could give a golfer after this treatment that you might be able to share with us?
Again, that might be more of a golf pro question. But again, it's once from a physical perspective, with the two exercises that we gave him were kind of entry level. A player that has very literal, just like we saw with Robin, very limited pelvic dissociation and very restricted thoracic, or a lot of thoracic kyphosis, it's limiting rotation. From there, we need to start progressing those patterns, because it's great if Robin can do that pelvic dissociation lying on her back on a table, but how do we then teach that in the golf swing? So we need to be able to get a player, and one that I give some people, less of a golf drill, but kind of an exercise using a golf club, getting on the ground, getting into that pelvic tilt or flat back position, and in your golf stance, being able to create some pelvic rotation, or can you dissociate without your upper body movement? We don't want to see these types of things happening. It's, can I create rotation or dissociation of the lower body? Get people doing this on the pressure mat. As they push, are they able to, where is their load? Are they pushing from their trail foot onto their front side? And we use the pressure mat in a lot of drills we work with golfers. Again, if we can't see the changes that we're making, just like that first golfer we see, if we just used the naked eye, we'd have no idea he was set up 60-40. He looked in the before and after pictures the exact same, but when we use the mat, he wasn't. Same idea with these types of drills, is as they're creating that dissociation, are they actually loading, or are they just spinning with their pelvis? Because those are two completely different things. We need to be able to use ground reaction force to create rotation versus just getting really good at twisting the pelvis. And I guess from there, again, when you work with your golf pro to then, how do we start getting a backswing and getting to impact positions, creating those? So the golf swing stuff, I usually leave more to the golf pros that they're working with, but 100%, once we get them to kind of master the stuff on their back, it's how do we progress these players into more functional positions and make sure they can still maintain, but not in that kyphotic position. Can they maintain a neutral pelvis? Can they dissociate it in standing, and can they do it at quicker speeds? Because again, golf speed are turning pretty quickly. So we'll get them up, get them using cables, bands. How do we create that pelvic dissociation while maintaining a neutral spine, strong core? So these are kind of early stages exercises, and we showed these because I thought they'd be really easy ones that like any golf pro can use as like a screening tool to say, hey, you have a physical restriction, you need to get assessed. And it's something we actually do a lot of. Is we have a lot of golf pros now that'll send us swings when they see a player who comes in and their trace change. And again, do they just forget how to golf, or do they have some sort of restriction? We do virtual assessments or have them come in, or we go to them, and is this swing change coming from a physical restriction? And we see a lot of that. And again, often there's some sort of a physical restriction that's causing that.
Great, thank you. And to answer the question, somebody said, what kind of a drill would you give to somebody after treatment? I mean, anything that's going to, anywhere where you're talking about, losing spine angle, early extension, some golf pros will throw, a chair behind, the student, have them swing and try and feel like they're keeping their butt cheeks up against, or their thighs up against that chair. So any of these early extension drills that that we've been taught over the years, would be a perfect drill to follow up with.
And those are great. Yeah,
athletes.
I completely agree. Those are great drills, and we see a lot of players be able to get really good at that, moving at slow speeds. But the problem is then once you start increasing speeds, that becomes more challenging. The faster you go, the harder it is to maintain changes. But you're absolutely right. Those are great drills for players to start with.
Cool.
Yeah. Or using the V1 when you're doing them is using the trail drill with the V1. Do you see the proper pressure change as you're going through it? So like I said, we use the V1 with a lot of drills that we're doing, exercises. It's when you can't see things with the naked eye, we rely on data and things that we can see to be able to pick up those small changes.
Thank you. That's hot. And so, see, I don't see any more questions coming in. Oh, actually, somebody said, now, do you share the pressure trace with the golfer? Or do you use the data for yourself to teach the golfer or to decide what treatment you're going to do?
We always share it. I always will have, like, I'll kind of show the player. Often I'll show it, like, I don't want to bias their second swing. So a lot of the times we'll collect all the data and show it to them at the end. Because if we give them too much information before, then it's like, did I just tell you where your change was and then you just corrected it? So we'll often have them do a before swing, assess their body, make the corrections, have them swing again on the mat, and then look at the two together. But I think it's crucial for golfers to understand and be able to see what they're doing. It helps them to buy into what we're doing. We're not just making things up. It's, you can see this is where you were before, this is where you were after. And that last example was great. Is, again, we didn't give him any golf instruction. We just gave him the ability to move a little bit better, and he created a swing fault that he's had for years.
Great. Now, do we want to hop into the third swing?
Yeah, let's do that. Yeah.
Cool.
So we'll bring up the first one, maybe. Possible.
Share my screen again.
Awesome. I think that's
And again,
that's the second one, I believe. That's the second. That's the after swing, I believe.
it. Oh, okay. Well, then we'll get into it. And again, I want to let people know that
Yeah.
Now, as some folks, especially face on, you know, how you set the mat down is going to change. So a lot of our folks who use the pressure mat a lot of times will see this in a different view. But if you look here, this is his trail side, along with this being a trail side. A lot of folks have the mat flipped around the opposite direction, which makes this. So just so everybody can see, this is trail.
Yes. Thank you for
And then
clearing that
this
up.
up, then this is heels. And this is toes, just so as we move this, if you use the pressure mat in the opposite direction, I want to make sure that you guys understand that this side is trail, which makes the lower side toes.
Correct.
So
Awesome.
that's for the
Thank
folks
you
that
for
are,
clearing that up.
yep,
Awesome. So the last one we're looking at here, and again, a really common pattern that we see is a Z pattern. So you can kind of see this player does a decent job of getting their load onto their backside, or in your video on the right side. But then as he comes forward, he has this kind of little hitch where he comes forward, the weight comes a hair back, and then he goes forward. You can kind of see it as you go through on the swing. And albeit his weight transfer is a little bit late getting to the front side, but you can see as he comes forward, the pressure starts moving forward. If you look at that white dot, and then as he gets his weight onto the front side, we have this little zig back, and then it shoots forward onto the front side. Again, really common thing that we see with a lot of golfers is that Z pattern. And this is something that you often is going to have a fairly high dispersion rate. They may have a two-way miss. We see this a lot as people have the kind of left hip impingement issues as they try to get onto their front side. Something in that front hip, as a right-handed golfer, left hip, starts pinching. So their body says, nope, I need to hold off, give this hip a little bit of room, and then they can come through. So these are players where we're often going to see maybe they leave the club open, and then because their weight is kind of, they don't know how to get onto their front side. One time it's open, then they try to correct, club face closed. So these are a lot of people that you may see those two-way misses, but a really common thing is that Z pattern. And again, a lot of times we see people and it's oh, I just need to stretch. And sure, maybe you have some mobility issues, but one of the things we'll see, I'm going to use our model here if we talk structurally. Hopefully you guys can all, maybe can you change the, yeah. So we have spine, pelvis here. Hopefully you guys can see this. But if we create, so if we get this person into a forward pelvic position, and we're trying to create rotation with the ball and socket. Nice neutral position, the ball can roll all day. As the pelvis starts to roll forward, the ball starts running into this hard socket as we try to create internal rotation. So we can stretch these muscles all day. But again, if we have a structural issue, you can't stretch structure. And as that ball starts rolling forward, you can get a labrum, a joint capsule, a hip flexor pinched in that little gap in between there. And we're never going to be able to create the rotation without finding a way to open up that hip. So we see this kind of forward, back, forward motion because that front hip is turning into a hard object. Down for now. A lot of tests that we use for a lot of golfers is we need to look at that front hip internal rotation. So again, some things that golf pros can do really easily is I'm going to give Robin on her back again. And it's something we always want to test both sides. I'm going to do Robin left side, front this side. Just kind of grab that hip, bring it up into a little bit of flexion, and create a little bit of back and forth grind. Is she getting some pinching or some impingement issues? Does it feel uncomfortable as I go through that motion? Great indication that there's something happening in the front of that hip. 2, back to that the arch, because again, if we're getting a lot of thoracic kyphosis or hunching through the upper back, we don't walk this way because the lumbar spine goes that way. So instead of walking here, the lumbar spine corrects to make us stand more upright. So again, if we're lying on that arch and people are failing that arch test, the pelvis is going to roll forward and that ball just doesn't have the room to turn or rotate. So we're never going to be able to stretch this out and create it until we can create a better pelvic position. So 1, into that grind test. Another way I have a lot of players do that is probably you've got a seat facing this way. And just, do they have enough hip internal rotation? So to get onto your left side at impact, we need that left hip to internally rotate for a right-handed golfer, right hip for a lefty. But can we create equal internal rotation side to side? A lot of these players that have the Z pattern are going to see a real limitation, or if we compare left to right, they're going to see less rotation on the left. So now, do we not have the ability to create enough internal rotation? We're getting that kind of hard end feel, and we're never going to be able to get onto the front side until we can get that pelvis into a more neutral position. Last one I have people doing is I'll have them do it live. You'll probably be able to see it better in standing, so the pelvic tilt. So facing that way for me is, can they actually tilt their pelvis? So get into a bit of a golf stance for me. Can you then flatten or pelvic tilt to flatten your low back? If you're unable to in a golf position, I often try this in lying down first. A lot of people can't even do this lying on their back. But if you can't then do this in standing, there's no way you're going to be able to maintain that flat back position through your entire swing. So we now have to then create a plan of how are we going to get out of this thoracic kyphosis. We're going to have a lot of players lying on the arch to reduce the kyphosis. Yes, some loosening, some stretching of the hip flexors is going to help. And then teach players how to pelvic tilt. Bridging exercises, where I'm going to come back on your back for me. Great one to start for a lot of players. Again, we're having this Z pattern. After we get them out of that kyphosis or that hunch position, get them to flatten or do that pelvic tilt we just showed you, squeezing the butt muscles and lifting up. Hold for a second. And again, are they able to maintain that position through the exercise? If they come up and they immediately start to arch that low back, they're cheating. And again, there's no way they're going to be able to maintain it through the golf position. So again, we got to rule out, do they have enough hip internal rotation? Do they have enough ability to extend their thoracic spine? Can they tilt their pelvis? Because if they can't do those 3 things, there's no way that they're going to get enough hip internal rotation to get to their impact position. So if we bring up again the before and after, then we can look at the after swing. And again, this is the player that we had maybe 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and we did some manual work to correct some of these issues. I had him lie on the arch. We did some hip internal rotation work. But again, if we look at that before and after, and that after period, there's a really small hitch as he's coming onto that front side. But again, he's now able to clear, and he's at least not shifting his weight forward, backwards, forward. There's just the smallest little hitch, but for the most part, it's a fairly linear trace. And again, we can see that the weight transfer is a little bit late, especially on the way through to impact. But again, now that the player has the ability to create left hip internal rotation and maintain better neutral alignment through the swing, now we can pass him off to his coach to be able to rehearse. All right, now that you have that hip internal rotation, how do we give you some golf drills that can now continue to enforce you to be able to do that pattern every time you swing the golf club? Hope that makes any questions on that one.
No, I think it's funny because again, I used to always tell, the student, once they got addressed, if they got too much of a C posture in their lower back, to try to flatten their belt buckle.
Sure.
To rotate. And so, from the golf pro side, that's what I was looking at. Again, you're looking at it from the medical or the physical side, but I was always trying to get it to flatten that belt buckle, to help them create rotation. So,
And that's the right.
very cool how you guys do it in a different way.
That's the right ideas. Yes, they need to be able to bring that belt buckle up to create the pelvic tilt, but why is the low back there in the first place? Which is why, again, it's so important to kind of look head to toe. As we'll see people who have upper back issues that are coming from flat feet or something completely different. So it's, yes, that's a great starting point is the pelvic tilt, but why is that pelvic tilt? Or why are they unable to do that in the first place?
Well, that's what I'm thinking is so interesting is we're just trying to make a move. You're trying to figure out why you have to make that move and why they're struggling and can't make that move.
And that's what it's all about, the why, right? Is the cause is more important. We're treating the symptoms, not the cause. It's again, person's gonna walk out of there, feel better, or you're gonna see a change in their trace that's temporary. But again, too often we see these players who they walk out of here, the trace looks great, but the next time they're practicing, it's completely reverted. It's again, we didn't address the cause of the problem, and then we're really not fixing anything.
And we've got one other question here. It's somebody saying when you're using the pressure mat, do you always have somebody have their shoes on, or sometimes you have them barefoot?
Sometimes we'll have them barefoot, depending on what we're looking at, but people are always going to be swinging with shoes on. Feet are something that I'm going to look at with every single golfer that we work with. I think that's something that's incredibly underassessed in golfers is their football. Do they have flat feet? Do they have a heel bone that's tilted? There's lots of things, and looking at shoes and footwear, and golf at the end of the day is a ground reaction force sport. So if we're not looking at somebody's feet, then 100% I think we're missing a huge piece of the puzzle.
Gotcha. I am pulling up something on the screen that you guys didn't realize I was going to, but from everything you've talked about, I absolutely think this fits in perfectly.
Perfect.
Here we go. This side, BK injured. So, no, hang on. So this first swing here is, let me hit share screen. This is some swing. If folks who have been watching Tuesday Traces for an extended period of time, you may have seen us address this swing. These were shot down at Claude Harmon's facility at the Floridian. This is Brooks Koepka in January of 2020. This would have been COVID year. And if you look at his golf swing, you can see how linear and smooth this trace is. I think I have, I guess I don't have it on loop, but so you can see how smooth this trace is. And I'll play through one more time. And this is a perfect example of a physical limitation or an injury. September 27th of the same year, Brooks Koepka came back down to them and was struggling, and they couldn't figure out why he was struggling hitting golf balls. If you look, this is the same iron after an injury, and you can see as he swings, he's coming into impact. Everything looks great right here. And look what happens the very next click. See how he's fearing?
Yeah.
He's backing up. And the folks down at Claude Harmon's facility asked Brooks, they put the two swings next to each other and said, "Why are you doing this?" And he said, "My knee hurts."
Right.
This was the year where they postponed the Masters. The Masters wasn't held until November.
Right.
And if everybody remembers, he was squatting down and wasn't able to mark his golf ball. And the reason is because his knee hurt.
Right.
They didn't discover, and he never admitted his knee hurt till they showed him this on the V1 pressure mat.
Chip,
So-
I guess you got to put our number on speed dial there.
Yeah, exactly. So as he was talking about that with the hip, it just made me think of this exact swing. So I
A
just wanted
knee
to
issue
share
is
that.
very rarely from the knee. It's
Mhm.
more often, like we see a lot of people come in with knee injuries and they don't really need knee treatment. It's hip, foot, thoracic spine, and it's coming from somewhere else more often than not.
Right.
I think that's a huge misconception with knee treatment, is too focused on the injury site and not the source of the problem. So it'd be interesting to do a full assessment on somebody like that. Again, if you can see somebody and if you're looking at his trace every day, do you catch that before it becomes a knee problem? And that's kind of what we try to work with a lot of golfers, right? Is can we catch these things before he has to miss time?
If you're overloading the knee, then you're underloading something else. And that's what we look for. So Brooks is breaking down his left knee because he's using his left knee too much. So we would look at say, well, what are you missing? And if you're missing something, then you're going to overdo it in the left knee. So it's really not a left knee problem. It's probably more of a hip or a pelvis issue that's causing a left knee. So everybody wants, and all the surgeons look at the left knee, and then you have surgery, and you have a scope, and go, boy, was that unnecessary? So I think we're getting to the point where we want to be a little bit more predictive of performance, because we deal with some high-profile athletes in the golfing world, and we got to predict. I'll look at some of my players, and I'll look at round by round and say, well, what happened in the second round? So it's more that we manage the outcome in terms of a round and say, how'd you feel? And then, like we look at hockey players, when hockey players stop scoring goals, it's not because they forgot how to do it. They couldn't do it. So I think we're bringing this kind of thinking and the process and using the B1 into the golf world.
I'll tell you what, this has been very, enlightening. It's just a very different conversation than what we usually have, and I really enjoyed it. Really appreciate your time, Dan, Kevin, Robin, you guys have been great. Really enjoyed
Thanks for having
you
us.
on here.
Yeah, it's been fun.
Just want to make sure, do we have any other last questions coming in? Let me check. I do want to mention that we do have some links in the chat for some of the items that they've been using as far as the arch and, the different things that they've been using. And over the next day, if there's anything that you might want to purchase, there's more information there on that, on their website. But then there's also a code of V1 Sports where you can get 20% off the order over the next day or so. So if there's any additional questions that you might have, feel free, to reach out to sales@v1sports.com, whether it's something specific for the Honsberger Physio group, we can get that question to, Kevin, Dan, and Robin. But other than that, really want to appreciate, thank you guys for your time. This has been, phenomenal. And if there's any last things you guys want to add, feel free.
Oh, I think we're good. Rob, you have anything to say?
Just quickly, if there's any pros who are interested in this type of concept, but maybe geographically not close by, we do a lot of virtual consulting, like Dan was mentioning, video analysis, whether it's directly through the V1 Sports locker room for your students. There's lots of different options out there, coaching. We fly, we've traveled to California. We have people coming here all the time from different parts of the world. So there's lots of different options if there's coaches or academies out there that are interested in a similar concept. And please feel free to reach out to us through the V1 Sports team, and we'll be happy to share some of those options for you.
The last thing I'll say, we didn't get here without a whole lot of support from a lot of pros and teaching guys. So there are no stupid questions. And we've asked more questions of pros and say, well, why are they doing that? I might have a reason why you want to do this, but not that. So be free, feel free to reach out, email us, contact us if you have a question, because there are no perfect answers. So we'd be happy to discuss things and sort of give you our input on what we would do. So
at the end of the day, I think a lot of the work that we do turns into a bit of kind of like a science experiment. Is we see something on the trace, we correct what we think is causing the problem, we fix it, get them back on. And did that make a change? It's this kind of immediate reassessment is what we're finding changing, what we're seeing in the swing. And we do a lot of these sessions, like Kevin was saying, right on the range with golf pros, because it's, if we can't get them to do their motion or what they need to, how they do the sport that their body needs to hold up. And once we've made the correction, is it hold going to change? And I think that's kind of why we like to be out in the world doing it with right on site.
you might ask yourself, why would you ever give a lesson without having a therapist right beside you on the range? Because we do a lot of that work, and it's to see the change from the player's point of view, to say, okay, hit a ball, do a correction, then go hit a ball. It's quite remarkable to see the change. And I think the client walks away and says, what a great experience. So it's all about the experience, and can we add to the experience, keep them healthy, improve their performance, and help the sport of golf.
I do have one last question. This will be the
Yeah.
last one I ask because this is not a golf related one. It says you use the mat for assessing strength exercises such as squats, lunges, bridges, push-ups, making a player stronger.
Absolutely. Sure.
Really,
I mean, if you're doing a squat and just a setup, if you're 60-40 in the golf swing, you're gonna be 60-40 in a squat. And if you've got a muscle imbalance because of structure, so why would you ever exercise out of balance? So if you use the V1 in an exercise facility, which we do, you can't even do a squat right, let alone swing a golf ball. So yeah, to that point, we actually bring it back and we assess our athletes while they're doing exercises. Because again, we can't tell whether you're 60-40, 50-50. But if you're not, you're going to create a problem doing the very exercise you think is going to help them. So you're actually creating a problem and an injury without realizing. So I would say yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for your time.
Awesome.
Appreciate it, guys. Thanks very much.
Appreciate it.
Have a great evening, folks.
You as
Everyone,
well. Take care. Thanks, everybody.
everyone listening. Take care. Bye.